All right, let's dive into something that's always been a huge puzzle about ancient Greece. This is the civilization that basically invented the idea of freedom and democracy, right? But here's the twist. It was all built on the backs of enslaved people. It's a massive contradiction. So how on earth did that happen? We're going to unpack that story right now.
Okay, let's start with this quote. It's from a thinker named Alcidamas, and for its time, it was absolutely mind-blowing. He says, "God made all men free, nature has made nobody a slave." You have to understand, in the ancient world, slavery wasn't questioned, it was just how things were. So for someone to say this out loud, it was radical. And this idea, this challenge to the status quo, is really the perfect lens for us to look through today.
So here's our game plan. We'll look at the Greek paradox, then see what set the stage for mass slavery. After that, we'll get into the main event, comparing the systems in Athens and Sparta. And finally, we'll wrap up with what it all means.
All right, section 1, the Greek paradox. And it really is a paradox. I mean, think about it. We're talking about the birthplace of democracy, of deep philosophical debates about justice and the good life. Yet, at the exact same time, a huge chunk of the population lived without any freedom at all. So the big question is, how did they square that circle? How could these two things, this incredible ideal of freedom and the brutal reality of slavery, coexist?
Now, the first thing we got to get straight is that the word slavery in ancient Greece is, well, it's a really broad term. It's not one size fits all. The experience of an enslaved person in Athens was completely different from someone in Sparta. We're not talking about small details here. These were fundamentally different systems, born from completely different circumstances. It's like comparing two entirely different species.
Okay, section 2, precursors to mass slavery. So, yeah, how did this whole thing get so big and so organized? What were the ingredients that allowed it to happen? To figure that out, we have to rewind a bit, way back to the early days of Greek society.
So, before you had the big-name city-states like Athens and Sparta, you had these earlier formations that scholars call Proto-States. A good way to think of them is like supersized chieftaincies. They weren't just simple villages anymore. They were complex enough to fight organized wars, to generate a surplus of goods, and, importantly, to create and enforce a social pecking order. And it's right there, that ability to organize, to fight, and to dominate, that the seeds of institutional slavery were planted. Which brings us to section 3, Athens. And let me tell you, the story of Athens is just dripping with irony, because the path to mass slavery here wasn't paved with conquest, but with reform. Yep, you heard that right. A series of changes designed to make citizens more free had the completely unintended consequence of creating a huge appetite for people who are not free.
So let's look at how things worked before this big shift. In the early days, the wealthy Athenian landowners didn't really need to import slaves from other places. Why? Because they had a built-in labor force right at home, other Athenians. If you were a poor farmer and you fell into debt, which happened a lot, you could end up as a debt bondsman. You were still technically a citizen, but you were forced to work for your creditor. You were in bondage to your own neighbor.
And then this guy Solon comes along in 594 BC and just blows the whole system up. His big reform was called the Shakasathia, which literally means the shaking off of burdens. And what a shakeup it was. He canceled all the debts, but he went even further. He made a new law. From now on, you could not use another citizen's body as collateral for a loan, period. It was revolutionary. An Athenian citizen could no longer be turned into property. And just like that, debt bondage inside Athens was history.
But, as you can imagine, freeing all those people created a brand new problem, a huge labor crisis. The rich landowners suddenly had no one to work their fields. And they couldn't just, post help wanted signs. Because, as the historian M.I. Finley pointed out, for a free Greek citizen, working for a wage, taking orders from a boss day in and day out, that was seen as dishonorable. It was almost like a form of slavery in itself. It was beneath the dignity of a free man.
So what do? You've got this major labor shortage, you're forbidden from forcing your fellow citizens to work, and they refuse to do it for a wage. The answer was simple, and in a way, devastating. You look for labor elsewhere. You look beyond your borders. And this is when Athens started to import non-citizens, foreigners, as chattel slaves on a massive scale. And that's the great paradox we talked about. The freedom of the Athenian citizen and the enslavement of the foreigner, they weren't just happening at the same time. One literally depended on the other. They were two sides of the very same coin.
So where did all these people come from? Well, they came from the harsh, brutal realities of the ancient Mediterranean.
The number one source was war. It was just an accepted rule of the game. If you win a battle, you can enslave the people you conquered. No questions asked. Then you had piracy and kidnapping, which were rampant. And on top of all that, a huge organized slave trade sprung up, creating pipelines that brought a constant flow of people, often non-Greeks from places like the Black Sea, into the slave markets of Athens. This is where M.I. Finley's work is so helpful. He basically came up with a checklist for what it takes to create a full-blown slave society. He said you need three things. First, a system of private land ownership where a few people own a lot of land and need tons of labor. Check. Second, you need commodity markets, things you can produce and sell for cash, like olive oil or silver from the mines, so you can afford to buy and maintain slaves. Check. And third, the key ingredient, your own local population is off limits for exploitation. And wouldn't you know it, after Solon's reforms, Athens fit that description to a T. They had all three.
All right, Section 4, Sparta. Now I want you to just completely reset your thinking. Forget everything we just said about Athens, about economic reforms and unintended consequences. Sparta is a whole different beast. This story isn't about economics, it's about brute force. It's about the cold, calculated, total military conquest of an entire people.
The entire Spartan state, their whole society, was built on something called helotry. And what were the Helots? They were the people of neighboring Messenia and Laconia, whom the Spartans had conquered centuries before and turned into a permanent, hereditary class of serfs.
And here's the crucial decision the Spartans made, a choice that set them apart from pretty much every other Greek city-state. When they conquered the Messenians, they didn't do the normal thing, kill the men, sell the women and children off to different places. No, they enslaved them in place. They subjugated the entire population and forced them to keep working the very land they'd always lived on. This created this weird, ambiguous status that even other Greeks had a hard time describing. They weren't free, obviously, but they weren't quite like other slaves either. They were something between the free and the slaves. And this is the key difference right here. The Athenian slave we talked about was chattel, a piece of property owned by one person. They could be bought and sold like a farm animal. They were torn from their homes, their families, their culture. Its condition the sociologist Orlando Patterson famously called social death. But the Helots? They were different. They weren't owned by individual Spartans, they were owned by the Spartan state. An individual Spartan couldn't sell a Helot family, and most importantly, they didn't experience that social death. They lived together, in their own communities, on their own ancestral land, with their own families and traditions intact. So how did it work economically? It was pretty straightforward and pretty brutal. The Helots farmed the land, the plots known as chloroi, which belonged to the Spartan citizens. Each year, they had to turn over a huge chunk of everything they grew, about half, to their Spartan master. They lived off whatever was left. And this arrangement was the absolute bedrock of Spartan society. It was the economic engine that made everything else possible. Because the Helots did all the work, every single Spartan citizen was free to do nothing but train for war, from childhood until old age, in that infamous system called the agoge.
But think about it. If you enslave an entire nation of people and force them to live right next to you, you've created a ticking time bomb. The Spartans were outnumbered by the Helots, maybe by as much as 10-1, and they were terrified. They lived in a constant state of paranoia about a massive Helot uprising. So how did they control them? Through pure state-sanctioned terror. Every single year, the Spartan government would formally declare war on the Helots. This was a legal loophole, basically, that allowed any Spartan to kill a Helot without facing religious or legal consequences. And then there was the Crypteia, a kind of secret police made up of the most promising young Spartan warriors, who would sneak through the countryside at night, terrorizing the Helots and assassinating anyone who seemed like a potential leader.
And the way this system ended tells you everything you need to know. In 371 BC, Sparta finally suffered a major military defeat, and their enemies liberated Messenia. And what happened to the Helots? Did they just wander off? No! Instantly, they reconstituted themselves as a free and independent people. It was proof that after hundreds of years of brutal oppression, they had never forgotten who they were. Their community, their identity, was still alive.
So let's step back and put these two systems head to head. When you see them next to each other, the differences really pop.
You can see it all laid out here. Athens, slavery came from an economic problem. The slave was an object, a piece of private property, totally alone. Sparta, slavery came from conquest. The Helot was a subject of the state, part of a community, controlled by fear. Totally different origins, leading to totally different realities. Okay, wrapping things up with our legacy and discussion.
Why does getting this distinction right matter so much? Well, because it hammers home a crucial point. There is no single, simple story of slavery in the ancient world. Each society created its own system of unfreedom, its own definitions, its own justifications, all based on its own unique history and its own unique problems.
So we're left with some pretty tough questions, aren't we? Think about what these two models show us. In Athens, a place we celebrate for democracy, expanding freedom for citizens actually created the demand for chattel slavery. One couldn't exist without the other. And in Sparta, the entire society warped itself into a brutal military camp driven by the constant fear of the very people whose labor they depended on. It forces you to really think about that central paradox we started with. What does freedom even mean in a world where, for so many, your liberty is built directly on someone else's chains?